We're back, and for those following us via the YouTube channel, we are now resuming activities. We welcome Diogo Santos Baleiro from the Ministry of Mines and Energy Brazil, who will give us the vision from the Ministry of Energy and Mines from his country regarding the roadway for fair energy transition that is also inclusive, uh, pertaining to COP30 for climate change to be held this year in the region. Thank you.
Okay.
Good morning, everyone. I promise I won't want to offend your ears with my Portuñol, so I will now speak in English. Switching language.
In a historic moment for our region. The holding of COP30 in Latin America, it's much more than a symbolic milestone. It's a unique opportunity to show that the world, that our region can lead by example, combining economic development, social inclusion, and climate responsibility. Brazil's come here with a clear and straight message. We fully support the climate change agenda, and we are committed to emissions mitigation, and we defend a just transition that respects socioeconomic realities and leaves no one behind. At the same time, we keep working on the G20 topics with the same constructive spirit. Methane reduction, decarbonization of the energy sector, and global energy security. Brazil is committed to the goals of the Paris Agreement and to reaching climate neutrality by 2050. Our updated national determined contribution, approved in 2024, sets an ambitious target. We aim to cut the net greenhouse emissions by around 60% by 2035 compared to 2005 levels. Here we bring some numbers that show we already start from a different position. In 2023, 49% of Brazil's energy mix came from renewable sources, and 89% of electricity produced in country was clean. The energy sector represents only 8% of national emissions in 2022, while the land use change, and forestry accounts for 48%, and agriculture 27%. Methane from the energy sector equals only 3% of all Brazil's total emissions, compared to 73% from agriculture. The oil and gas exploration and production sectors accounts for less than 1% of the national methane emissions, mostly fugitive, and is one of the most controlled in the world. In the global energy sector, Brazil contributed around 1% of the greenhouse emissions in 2022. These numbers show that Brazil is already contributing in a concrete way to mitigate climate change. And we need to be realistic. Even the most ambitious scenarios from the International Energy Agency, fossil fuels will continue to play an important role until 2050. In Brazil, the strategy is clear. It's not about abandoning production, but about decarbonizing it and making it more efficient. And now here I share some important data. Almost 98% of Brazilian oil and about 88% of natural gas are produced offshore, an environment where methane control is strict and high technological. The average greenhouse intensity of Brazil exploration production is about 40 kilograms of CO2 equivalent per barrel of oil, while the global average is around 20. New offshore projects are already aimed to emission below 9 kilograms of CO2 equivalent per barrel of oil, using best practice and advanced technologies. Here I bring strong numbers from our country that shows that our oil gas sectors play a key role in a just energy transition. It guarantees energy supply, energy security, and stable supply. It represents almost 10% of Brazil's industrial gross domestic product and creates jobs and income. It funds more than half of all energy research and development in Brazil, including projects in hydrogen, bioenergy, and carbon capture and storage. And it is expected to generate around 2.9 trillion reais in royalties and government revenue by 2055, money that will help finance the energy transition. Brazil has taken an important step with resolution number 8 of 2024 that was approved by our National Energy Policy Council. That's the main government body that defines the country's strategic energy policy. The resolution established clear guidelines to cut greenhouse gas emissions in oil gas sector, in exploration and production. The main action already underway include the elimination of routine flare by 2030 to the zero routine flare initiative, the reduction of methane emissions fully aligned with the global methane pledge, greater transparency in emission indicator in exploration and production projects led by ANP and PPSA and PR regulatory agents, support for new technology and the share of use infrastructure to reduce emission even further, and prioritizing projects with higher carbon efficiency. The Exploration Production Decarbonization Scenario Report, released in March this year by EPA, our Brazil's official energy research company, shows that in the short-term scenarios, technology already available, such as the replacement of pneumatic device and gas reinjections, can cut emissions by about 5% by 2037, which is a positive financial return. In the medium-term scenarios, EPA indicates that combined cycle turbines, gas monetization, and CCUS can increase this reduction to around 15%. And in the long-term scenario, full electrification could reach a 20% reduction, but it will require a high investment and depends on technological advances. And just to share, today I have an update from our coordinator of environment of our regulatory agents, Daniela Godoy, that's here. That's the methane agenda, about methane agenda, that a new methane resolution is expected by the end of the next year, and a preliminary study will be released soon for public comments. ANP has an ongoing partnership with the World Bank and is discussing possible partnership with the Clear Air Task Force. In February, ANP held a methane event with the global expert, including the IEA, and participates in the MNRV group discussion. The focus is currently on exploration production, according to CNPE Resolution 8 that I had mentioned before. But ANP is also assessing the possibility of including other segments of the oil and gas chain. And about climate governance there in our country, Brazil has adopted a participative and transparent climate governance, making the climate agenda cross-cutting and integrated into public policies. The Interministerial Committee on Climate Change, or CIM, brings together 22 government institutions and ally policy on climate actions and a just transition. The new Brazilian climate plan, now under development, includes states, cities, and productive sector, and the civil society too. The Ministry of Mines and Energy is responsible for the adaptation and mitigation plans in the energy sector, integrating energy security and sustainability. This governance straight international cooperation positions Brazil as a reliable partner and a regional leader in sustainable energy. So, ladies and gentlemen, Brazil reaffirms its full support for this agenda, and defends regional integration in renewable energies, bioenergy, and hydrogen. Fair climate finance and technology transfer, solution based on science, innovation, and respect for socioeconomic realities, ensuring a just and inclusive transition. Up to this point, we can clearly see that Brazil is living proof that it's possible to produce energy, ensure energy security, and reduce emission in a constant way. Our message is clear. Brazil is part of the solution for the global climate agenda. We are committed to emission mitigation, to a just and inclusive transition, and to continue the G20 topics, especially methane reduction and the decarbonization of the energy sector. COP30 in Latin America will be a milestone to show that our region can lead by example, with climate responsibility, social justice, and sustainable economic development. This is how Brazil sees the future, growing, creating jobs, and preserving our biomes, all at the same time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Diogo. Now we would like to invite Tomas de Oliveira Bredariol. He's from the International Environmental Energy. He's going to introduce the global methane tracker results for the regional and global context. Thank you. I will speak in English. Therefore, the people that would require a Spanish translation, you can use.
Saying that I am really happy to see such a full room here today. I started my professional career in IBAMA in Brazil, the main environmental agency there. I then, about 5 years ago, changed to the International Energy Agency to work on methane emissions. And at the time, I think if you gathered all the people working on methane around the world, we would still have space in this room. So now we see here in Latin America such a full room. And similarly, I have been in methane events in Europe. I've had colleagues traveling to the United States. We've presented at events in Central Asia, Southeast Asia. We're planning an event in Africa. And time and again, we're seeing full rooms. So this really gives me hope that we're seeing a change, because methane emissions, they often don't get the attention they deserve. But this is changing, and this is very positive. And the International Energy Agency has been bringing attention to this topic for several years. We're in the 6th iteration of our annual report, the Global Methane Tracker, that brings light to this theme, and it draws on our Global Methane Tracker database, which is where we look at all of the different sources of data, especially measurement-based data, to give an overview of the state of play of methane emissions and the outlook for them in different scenarios and according to the different policies that are in place around the world. And what we see from this data today is that the record production of oil, gas, and coal, combined with limited mitigation efforts, have led these methane emissions to stay at record high levels, above 120 million tons of methane per year. And some people will come and ask, well, how sure are you about this? Aren't there a lot of uncertainties related to these estimates? And certainly there's some level of uncertainty, but these estimates at the global level, they are well constrained, because we know what is the concentration of methane in the atmosphere, what are the characteristics of this methane. And atmospheric methane concentrations are rising more quickly than that of any other major greenhouse gas, and at a rate that is faster than in any period since record-keeping began. So this is very concerning news, and we need to be worried about this. And there are many sources of methane emissions. Certainly agriculture and waste are areas that we need to work on, but we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that the biggest potential for reductions lies in the energy sector, and specifically within fossil fuel supply. We know that it is possible to produce oil gas with very little, near zero methane emissions. And this year we estimated that about 5% of global oil and gas production already meets a near zero emission standard. And there are many good reasons to work on raising this share. Because tackling methane emissions brings a double dividend. On one side, we are tackling the issue of climate change, and on the other, we are increasing energy security. So if we look at the first side of this equation, strong action to reduce methane emissions under current trends of fossil fuel demand would deliver a reduction of about 0.1 degrees Celsius by 2050. Now, this might sound not much to some of you, but it's really huge in climate terms. It is the equivalent to eliminating all the emissions from the world's heavy industry today in a single stroke. This is really major. And on the other side, in terms of energy security, if we convert that 120 million tons of methane that I just talked about to natural gas, we get to about 200 billion cubic meters of natural gas. That's a lot of natural gas. Now, not all of this could be brought to market. Some of it we don't know how to capture yet. Some of it needs to be destroyed because it's in very low concentrations. But methane, action on methane could make about 100 billion cubic meters of natural gas available to gas markets around the world. That's the same, more or less the same amount of natural gas that Norway exports each year. So it's a big opportunity for energy security. And alongside this loss of natural gas as methane emissions, there's a lot of flaring happening. You might have seen a report from the World Bank last week. It showed that, again, flaring has increased. We are about 150 billion cubic meters of natural gas that is flared each year. And most of this is routine flaring, non-emergency flaring. And a lot of it could be brought to markets. And addressing these two issues in tandem would create a lot of synergy. And as you've heard already today, we know the solutions to these problems. In the oil and gas industry, it's about changing equipment that emits by design, by low emissions or no emitting equipment. It's about deploying vapor recovery units to recover low pressure flows or deploying leak detection and repair systems. In the coal industry, you can drain coal gas seams before operation so that you reduce the emissions associated with the operations. Or you can tackle ventilation air methane through regenerative thermal oxidizers. And it's not only in the fossil fuel sector where we have opportunities. We shouldn't forget that there are hundreds of millions of people around the world today that rely on traditional use of biomass for cooking and heating. Here in Latin America and the Caribbean, we have about 10% of the population that is still relying on these, on using agricultural waste or dung or other sources of polluting ways of cooking and heating, which comes at a great cost to health. And these also lead to a lot of emissions. So a big opportunity is to provide access to clean energy for people around the world. And there are also options to reduce methane emissions from the modern bioenergy supply. I'm going to be talking a bit more about that tomorrow in the biogas panel. Now, as I was saying, there's a lot of momentum around methane action. Today, about 75% of the emissions from fossil fuels are covered by some sort of methane pledge. Certainly the most important one is the Global Methane Pledge, but there are others, including China's Methane Action Plan. And while it's very good to see these pledges, so far we have seen very little backing by specific plans and policies to tackle emissions. Right now, we estimate that current policies in place would deliver a reduction of about 25% of oil and gas methane emissions by 2030, though that falls short even of the Global Methane Pledge goal, and we should have in mind that since this is the sector where we have the largest scope for abatement, we likely need to see a larger reduction than 30% in pathways to deliver on the Global Methane Pledge. And if we look at our region here, Latin America and the Caribbean, then the policies would only deliver a reduction of about 10 to 15%. So we're well short of the goals that we have set. When we look at the corporate sector, there's also a lot of good momentum there. About half of the global oil and gas industry is committed to near zero methane emissions by 2030. We have seen, for example, last year, PetroChina, that's the largest producer in Asia, joining in the Oil and Gas Decarbonization Charter. We have seen a lot of companies here in Latin America joining the Oil and Gas Methane Partnership 2.0. So there's a lot of good momentum there. But I would like to draw your attention to the overlap between these two charters. It seems that the oil and gas industry is very much following policy signals. Only 5% of global oil and gas production is only covered by corporate pledges. The rest is overlap. So we need to move beyond pledges. There are very few countries and companies that have been able so far to show verifiable methane reduction, and this needs to change. Now, this is not to say that we haven't seen any progress. If you look at our data, in the past 5 years, we have seen an improvement of about 10% in the upstream intensity of oil and gas operations. So that's the amount of methane that they are releasing by the amount of energy that they are producing. And this is good news, but it's too little, it's slow progress. If we implemented the technologies that already exist, the best practices around the industry, we would see methane intensities that are very much in line with near zero methanes by 2030. And that's where we need to be headed to. We need to move from this mindset of small improvements, intensity improvements, and we need to think about delivering absolute reductions in methane emissions in the oil and gas industry. And one of the most dynamic areas is the development and technology from satellites. We've heard that, unfortunately, we lost MethaneSat recently, but there are still around 25 satellites in orbit that provide insights on methane emissions, including some dedicated satellites that are looking specifically at methane. And I want to draw your attention to the data from Sentinel-5P. So this is one of the very few satellites that provides a global overview of emissions and that has been operating for a number of years. Now, it only sees very large leaks. We're talking about tons of methane per hour, right? And what we see from this data is that these very large leaks are not decreasing. And in fact, in 2024, they reached a record level. And that happened despite having a lower number of days where observations were possible due to issues like cloud cover or other obstacles. And there, as I was mentioning, there are many ways to reduce methane emissions. And as always in our updates, we want to have a detailed look at what are the costs and benefits and investment needs to deliver on these reductions. And what we see in the oil and gas industry is that you can often make a profit from reducing methane emissions. Now, this takes into account the cost and considerations around whether you can bring this natural gas to markets, whether it be through as compressed natural gas in trucks, or by installing a new pipeline, or through other means. And absolutely, we acknowledge that in some places, gas is simply stranded. So you need to reinject it or combust it. But most of the measures, or a good deal of the measures in the oil and gas sector, provide rates of return that are positive. So what this means is that over the lifetime of the project, the amount of money that you're spending year on year and the amount of return that you have on that money is positive. And what we see here is that there's a good deal of measures that come with a rate of return above 25%. So that's more than the rate of return that companies are usually targeting when they think about their spending decisions. So this brings to mind, well, why then are companies not taking greater action on this? And certainly some companies are doing, but as I mentioned, progress has been slow. And there are many possible reasons to explain this. These vary depending on the region, on the facility, on the company, but some of the important ones are that often these investments are relatively small. The capital spending is relatively small when thinking about big spending decisions, and they don't really grab the attention of the board. Sometimes it's the case that companies are simply not aware of the amount of emissions that are happening. And as we heard here today, there are a lot of companies which are not measuring their emissions. So they don't really know what are the volumes in place and what are the opportunities. Similarly, sometimes they're not aware of what are the technological solutions available to them to reduce these emissions. So we need an honest dialogue, and I hope today we contribute to this between industry and the government and other stakeholders, because these are obstacles that can be overcome, but we need this dialogue to make that happen. Now I want to focus a bit more our attention in Latin America and the Caribbean. We have a large opportunity here oil, gas, and coal operations in the region have emitted about 10 million tons of methane emissions last year. And what we see is that on average, the intensity of upstream operations here is about twice the global average. Naturally, this varies from country to country, but there's a lot of opportunity in every single place to improve performance. And these are countries that are very much committed, except from Venezuela. All of these countries here are committed to the Global Methane Pledge. They have been taking action. We heard some of this today. But we need to move from pledges to progress. And certainly there are some companies, some countries like Colombia and Mexico, which have policies, plans, and detailed ways to strategies to reduce methane emissions. These include some of the tried and tested approaches, like restrictions on flaring and venting, like leak detection and repair requirements, or technology standards. And these solutions that have been tried and tested that don't need any kind of system that is specifically focused at measuring methane emissions, so they can be deployed today in a relatively straightforward way. They can reduce emissions from these operations by about 60%. So that's a big opportunity and a big first step that can be taken. But we also need better data. We need better data to be able to allocate resources efficiently, and we need better data to make sure that we are making progress and that we can show that we are making progress in the region. So we need to work, we can start with tried and tested approaches. We also need to work on data to progress further. And in many ways, we know enough, right? We know that methane emissions is a major issue. We know that it's possible to produce oil, gas, and coal with near zero methane emissions. And we know that we need to do this if we are to tackle climate change. So the issue is really implementation. And I want to close by coming back to a message that we heard from the IEA's executive director today. When we look at all of the different options that we have on the table to reduce emissions and advance on the energy transition agenda, from renewables to efficiency to electric cars, tackling methane emissions comes near the top of everyone's agenda. It needs to be a first-hand priority. And we hope that through the discussions here today and beyond, everyone can be thinking about what are the real-world actions that they can be undertaking and that they should be undertaking to make us move from pledges to progress on methane. Thank you.